My first real experience with fighting fire was in 1961, the year I graduated from high school. That time I was 17, but from 15 through 18, because my birthday is in the summer, and so it just at the end of the summer in August. So I had to spend the year after graduating from high school there, and then 19 was my first year with the Forest Service. But at 17, I worked with my best friend growing up, whose father also worked for Johnson Flying Service. He was known as the miracle pilot of Idaho, quite a history of him. And he worked for Johnson Flying Service's operation out of McCall. And they ran the flying out down there at the same time. They operated both bases. He was killed in a Ford Trimotor crash over by Townsend, Montana, which is east of Helena. Back up in the sagebrush country up in there, and that's what they're doing. There's spraying sagebrush and killing it. But it was probably one of the most famous of the so-called mountain pilots at that point. But we're only a month apart, and since they lived in Missoula for most of the time, even when he was working out of Idaho, I'd spend as much time at their place up the Rattlesnake, which in Missoula is just up over here north of the university and back up in the mountains there where the creek runs through, and that's just where we lived. And so from pre-grade school all the way on up, we just ran together. And so we were both working as gas boys. We were 13 when his dad died, and my father kind of took him under his wing. He ended up being the chief of operations for Evergreen and the head of all flight operations for Evergreen out there with their major operation when they had it going around the world. And he wanted to fly, I wanted to jump. And so he stayed with it, but they'll take you back to 61. Summer of 61 was a ridiculously hot fire season. We would work 18 hours a day driving the gas trucks around, and the activity was intense, from large Connie type airplanes bringing crews in to the retardant planes and all. And we had talked about it for a long time, but we really wanted to go on a retardant run. You can't do that. The pilots won't let you do that, even though they're single double seat aircraft side by each. They still run them. Most of them they run alone. It takes the bigger ones. It takes two pilots, but most of them. And so we devised a way, and the guy's name that our best friend is Penn Store, and we're still very close. But we figured out a way, and he got a camera from one of the jumpers out there. He's probably the most famous jumper at the time. We didn't know that, but he's the kind of guy that everybody admired because everybody knew who he was, and quite loud and quite very, very. Hal Samsel was his name. He just died last year, but incredible guy. And as it turned out, and that could have been close to that time. Penn Store's mother married this guy's father, who was a forester that was very well respected way back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And so that might have been something where he knew him. We didn't know him. I just remember on one of the flights that I'd go on with a DC-3 and watching him in the airplane, and the bravado and the funniness and the entertainment that the guy had, just pure country. That's what he sounded like. But he had a camera, and so Penn had asked him for a camera, and we figured out this way to get on the airplane. And we were in a B-25. Pilot, this guy by the name of Dick Torrance. And when you get in a B-25, it's right underneath the cockpit. B-25, you know what they look like? I'll show you pictures of it here, but it's twin engine, high wing, double tail. It had a nose gunner in there, so it had all the plexiglass nose side of it where he sits in there with his machine guns or 50 caliber machine guns and fires away. If you're getting in the airplane, the ladder drops down and you go straight up to the cockpit where the pilot sits. The nose being down here, and the nose gunner goes up in there and then he goes around a real narrow slot to squeeze his way in there to get in his seat to sit. Well, all you can see if you're in that bubble is you can see the pilot's feet on the pedals. And so when he came in after dropping on a fire, and then they fuel him up, and we were both off at this time, and they fuel him up, and then they reload him with retardant, and away they go. So we got the bright idea to sneak in up in the bubble when nobody's looking, and we're sitting there waiting, and he climbs in, and he's not going to see us. There's no way. I mean, he would have to stop and crawl forward and look in there to see where we are. So he has no idea we're there. And I'm sitting on this side of the nose, and he's on this side. We're facing each other this way. So I'm looking out the left engine, and he's looking over at the right. And we don't say too much about it or whatever. I don't even remember him taking pictures on our way out. I don't even remember him taking pictures. And my memory was that it was a Brownie camera, and that's the way it's been forever, just a little snapshot camera. We went down on the Salmon River, which is straight south of here, over Lost Trail Pass, which is the Idaho-Montana border, and into the Salmon River. A lot of smoke everywhere. It was a really nasty fire here. But the fire had started down on very close to the river's edge on the Salmon and the canyons, like so. The trees are really very thick because the river's fairly low. And we were probably up around 6,000 or 7,000 feet up there in the higher country. We circled up there, and then we followed the lead plane in. And we're still not even saying anything. These other words, we're at 17 years old, you're down scared shitless saying, "What did I do?" But you're still excited about it. And we come around and we made the pass following the lead plane, and then you go back up there again, and the lead plane guy that showed him where to drop says, "Okay, you're on your own now." And we came back down on the fire, heading down towards the river, and we were supposed to be dropping the retardant right up on top, just over the slope. So we came down, we went into the smoke, and everything's just white. And we could hear, actually feel more than hear with the big engines. This, and the bubble is made up of plexiglass plates with aluminum flashing that keeps them together. They're not airtight, they leak. We were pretty much covered with little tiny pieces of pine needle. So we'd gone through the trees. Didn't see any of that, just felt it. And then it pulled on out. We were way down there, probably 300 or 400 feet above the river. And then he settled on down, and the reason he's going to the river, which we didn't know at the time, is because it's 100 degrees up, but the cool air over the river works. And so he's flyable again. And he's still flying. He just went out and he just climbed what seemed like a 45-degree angle. It wouldn't have been, but he put the coal to it. And next thing that we still haven't said anything to each other. But we're there and we're alive, and this is all processing in your head. And we're heading back to Missoula, and we come out over Hamilton. We're running along, and he hadn't, as far as I know, he hadn't taken any pictures. Well, turns out he did. We've got pictures of movie pictures, which he just found about 6 months ago. And they had put the movies on a CD when he gave the camera back to the guy. They didn't put it on a CD at that time. He still had the old 8mm. But he then put him on that and gave him a copy of it many years ago, which he says he forgot about. We were flying back into Missoula, and I'm over here and I'm looking out, And I started to tap him on the shoulder and say, look, look. And the whole wing's on fire. There's just fire, big red flame and smoke just covering the whole, behind the engine. And it's like, oh my God, here, here it is. And what had happened was that when we went through the trees, the pine needles and branches and little pieces of it had clogged up the air oil cooler. So the engine overheated and caught on fire. Well, the pilot pulled he's got one shot of a CO2 fire extinguisher in each engine. And at the same time he pulled that, he feathered the engine, and you got, that, right? When the blades start going like this, and they can turn them vertically or into the wind, and then the prop stops turning, because otherwise you cannot stop a propeller in an airplane unless they feather it. And so it's not windmilling. And it stopped, and it's just sitting there, and I'm looking over that and the thing, but the fire was out. But we were on one engine. And then the next thing that shows up is that he unfeathers the engine. I think that's the next thing, whatever it is. But that's all he has to do. He doesn't have to start it. He just unfeathers it, and it starts by itself. So then he goes in, and we do remember we circled for quite a while over Missoula. There's no pictures of that. But it shows us going by this Blue Mountain lookout out here, which is just right on the edge of town in the hills southwest. And the next thing you see is the runway coming up. We're landing from the north, so we had gone up, way up on the mountains up in here, and then flying around. He says he wasn't going to land with he said, I'm getting ahead of myself. He turned around and he came back in when both engines running, and he landed, and things are fine. And we pull over there to the ramp, and these people come running over because they knew he'd been flying around up there with one engine, and so you've got fire trucks and all this kind of stuff, and us two idiots sitting on the nose. And when he found that out, he came out, you sons of bitches, if your dad knew that, he'd kill me. You're riding in that airplane. He said, you know what I was going to do? He says, you realize I have a parachute? And he says, if I had unfeathered that engine and it was still on fire, he says, I wasn't going to land it. He says, I'm heading it up into the wilderness, and I'm out of there. So, that was our baptism of fire. My first fire I'd ever went on was through. And so we still laugh about that, obviously, to this day. But he found this CD when he was moving a few months ago from Tigard to wherever he was moving to out there in Portland. And it's really rough. And of course it's blurry 8mm stuff. But it does have us going into the smoke, and he does have the engine feathering. You can't see the smoke and the fire when the engine's still running because it's behind the point of view that he could get sitting here looking this way to try and turn around and shoot. He didn't have a field of vision to do that.